All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of CO Pod. I'm your host, Caroline, and today we're joined by a very special guest. So let's just get right into it. On this episode of CO Pod, we're joined by Adam Stark. Adam, how are you doing?
Caroline, doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I am very excited after a long back and forth of trying to get our schedule sorted and just the whole mix of stuff that came up every time we wanted to record. So happy to be here finally.
It was so funny. I think we were even talking on the back end, like there must be a curse or the universe is against us or something.
We did it though.
Yeah, so glad to be here. I think we both joined this recording this morning. We're like, finally. So just so glad to make this happen today. And so glad to have you here. For anyone that doesn't know, Adam Stark is a special operations veteran turned real estate developer, construction executive, and founder of Jet.Build, a platform built to give owners and builders a true central command for their projects. Adam spent years running complex construction and redevelopment projects in New York. Shout out to you, New York is a beast, where he firsthand saw fragmented systems, delayed information, and unclear accountability erode the trust and margin for owners. Something I know our listeners are definitely familiar with. That experience, combined with his time in airborne special forces, led him to focus on one big question. What would construction look like if it operated on the same level of visibility, discipline, and a shared situational awareness as a high performing military unit? So that was a huge spark notes there of you, Adam. Did I get it right?
Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you very much for that introduction.
Awesome. And I think, I'd love to hear it from your words. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. I kind of went spark notes there, but I'd like to get a little bit deeper on, who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Totally. So, after finishing undergrad, I kind of just fell into the space, into the industry. Had an awesome opportunity just for, via networking through my, undergraduate degree, and started off working for a family office, vertically integrated developer, which led to a unique experience as it relates to visibility across the stakeholder channel, as I'll call it, which is, sometimes self-performing, so operating as the GC, sometimes hiring, vetting and hiring the GC, and then either way being kind of that point person between site teams and site progress, all the way up to the lender and back and forth and vice versa. So really, in that experience, also as you noted, right, working in New York City is not easy. So you really get all of the chaos in across the teams, like I mentioned, but then also just in kind of managed projects in what is a tiny kind of geographical location with lots of code and compliance scenarios. So again, just in that experience, I was able to understand where gaps exist in the market, which led to where I'm at today with Jet.Build, and then kind of like wrapping in that last piece as it relates to kind of military background and how that integrates or works with our environment, the built environment, the built world. Is I started a podcast to really highlight and understand how other veterans are treating kind of their experience and transitions into the built world. So it's called the Veterans Who Build Show, specifically to talk about life stories, but also kind of how veterans are leveraging their skill sets in our industry.
I love that. And I think it's one of my favorite things to have a fellow podcast host on here. It's just so much fun. The conversations. I mean, you guys are going to see with this episode. Like it's just truly incredible, the value and content we can provide to all of you listeners together. And I even forgot to mention that in your Spark Notes because Adam, you do so much and you have so many different, very unique skill sets that really tie into each other so well.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. One thing I think we see a lot, and definitely we'll get into this conversation a little bit later, is, there's a lot of overlap when it comes to construction, when it comes to veterans and military as well. And you've described the military to construction transition as familiar, but also frustrating. Um, so when you were really joining the construction industry after your service, what caught your attention the most during that transition?
Yeah, so first, like some obvious, I call it relatable skills are one is you're on job sites, right? So like
Yep.
you're in a field per se, you're doing kind of manual labor, you're active physically.
Mhm.
So those are like easy kind of comparables versus a desk job, which exists in probably like majority of just overall industry. So that right away was like, okay, this is neat. Like I'm not sitting at a desk, I'm not in some corporate role, I'm like
Yeah.
actually interacting with people. And then next, like peeling back another layer is being on a job site and all of a sudden realizing, okay, well, you're interacting with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different roles and companies, and a lot of different kind of managerial hierarchy or structure. So those are really. It was interesting to just immediately recognize those kind of comparables and understand. Oh well, maybe there's a lot of this kind of ingrained like uh, managerial structure that you understand, or just ability to work with different people, ability to understand complex scenarios, timelines, budget intensive work, whether it be military background or a construction job site. So those are like just some overarching overlap that I saw right away.
Yeah, and I think those parallels are so, I see those too. And I think I've never really thought about it, before, all of the different parallels here between, the military and construction and how these projects are run, organized, and executed. But, one part that, maybe I don't have as much insight into, maybe because it's not my shared experience, but what about that, the transition, everything, what makes it so frustrating? Because I'm sure there's frustrating parts of it as well. Not every transition is going to be smooth.
Right. So you know what? It's I try to create like some relatability in some way, shape, or form. One, there's a lot of people who have never even met a veteran. So
Mhm.
there's going to naturally be a cultural gap, and also vice versa, right? So civilians to veterans, veterans to civilians. Second is if you imagine having a career, for example, I'm just saying random examples, right? In accounting, and all
Yeah.
of a sudden after you have a career in accounting and you were a somewhere in management and in kind of a senior role, and now all of a sudden you're starting in marketing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's going to have like some ego impact in the sense where your past experience, maybe you'll find some translatable skills, but in reality, you're going to have to start fresh. In reality, you're going to have to, start as an entry level role. You're going to have to understand what's what, skill sets, learn ins and outs of that new industry. So that's a kind of similarity that exists for service members transitioning into, civilian life is like you kind of lose the rank that you had and you have to build that up again. So, that's a really just easy way to kind of gain some insight into what veterans experience when they start out in their civilian careers.
Yeah, and these challenges, they're not so much as personal challenges. I know you've argued this in the past. It's not really those personal challenges that's the toughest. It's the structural challenges. All those things you were just mentioning, really the structure of it all and those blind spots that prevent teams from sharing the same operational picture. I think that's a lot of what we're seeing there. So any thoughts there on some blind spots as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go down to like a real in the weeds example is, if you're coming
Yeah.
from a structure where you're used to, have a uniform, so you're not even like
Yeah.
deciding what you're wearing, right? B, have, all of the logistics arranged for you. So whether that be, where and how you sleep, what and when you eat, what you're wearing,
Mhm.
very structured, hierarchy of chain of command, very structured understanding of how to I guess rise in rank, right? Performance kind of KPIs.
Yep.
So everything is super, super structured so that when you kind of leave that environment, you're free, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But there's pros and cons to all of it, right? But it is going to be a shock, just
Yeah.
generally speaking, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
So those are some examples.
The culture shock, I think, is the thing I hear about, the most of going, from life in the military to civilian life, and just that cultural shock and everything that comes with it as well. We hear about PTSD all the time. We hear about all of these different challenges that are more so on, the personal level. Of course, there's, structural things as well. And I think it's really interesting to kind of, compare and contrast those in construction versus other industries. One of the things you're also doing with construction owners, and I'm so happy I finally get to announce this to all of you guys, but Adam is going to be one of our guest authors on
Mhm.
construction owners. So he's going to be doing a series all about this information we're talking about today: veterans, construction industry, the transition, the challenges, the everything that makes that process unique. So Adam, would love for you to give some insights there, maybe drop a few hints on what our first article is going to be about, just to get the audience as excited as I am.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. I want to provide even one tidbit that I think is underrated as a whole is recognizing the service member slash veteran um, uh, ecosystem,
Mhm.
leveraging that for workforce gap, right? And
Yeah.
now, once you go in an additional layer of leveraging that for workforce gap, it's how to work with veterans in the industry, so to avoid and or be prepared for and or to provide the right structure for vets in your company, right? So it kind of touches on all of those areas and gives some, advice and feedback on how to do these things well. And that's based off of, the conversations that I've had through, we got about 50 episodes now. So each episode runs, I think on average, like a little bit over 2 hours. So there's a lot of data that I'm, you know, providing that, information from.
Yeah. And, actually, something you just said right now really got me thinking. We're thinking about, everyone in the industry, we're so concerned with this, workforce shortage, this
Mhm.
workforce gap. And, we're thinking about, who are we going to get into this industry? And I see a lot of people targeting, young students, even as young as like middle school. And while I think that's amazing, I love getting more people into the trades. I feel like an area where we as an industry have been lacking a little bit and, maybe overlooking is our veterans
Mhm.
and getting them
Totally.
into the industry.
There's even there's like a cheat code, I'll call it, where you have like literal um uh like divisions within military that are doing construction of some
Mhm,
capacity
mhm.
in their service. So you can really go in, be very specific in terms of, service members that you're tapping that, I mean, have literally objective translatable skill sets into, civilian construction built environment.
Mhm.
But on like the broader concept, there's a lot of the soft skills that translate, kind of like what I was touching on earlier, in terms of what I just saw when I initially got onto job sites. So yeah, it's really an awesome opportunity to tap into service members and tap into the programs that help transition service members into civilian life, which kind of runs in a similar means and methods that uh, construction companies or just companies in industry would go and look at, whether it be college grads or high school grads as it relates to like that shadowing, the
Yeah.
mechanism, internships and such. So like military creates programs that allow for kind of that same capacity of like integrating into the company slowly but surely. So I highly recommend, going that avenue, going that route.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see, more veterans in our industry and, more work done by the industry to make it, the transition easier, to provide those opportunities. And I think, as much as we're all worried about this, workforce shortage, workforce gap, I really think that we're going to be just fine. It is daunting, it's scary, but there is so many people out there
Mhm.
looking for opportunities that construction can provide. One of those being veterans. I think that's probably our biggest pool. Like we should be focusing
Yeah.
so much more there.
I totally agree. Yeah, I also think just as like a general digress point,
Mhm.
is I think that the trades and construction, it just needs better like awareness and marketing,
Yeah,
because it deserves more attention as it relates to like a good trajectory, for just a career. I mean, if I could go back in time, I would go through electrical school and become an electrician, hands down, no question, right? So I mean,
completely agree.
it just needs more better, just marketing, generally speaking.
Yeah, marketing and, breaking the stereotypes, breaking
Yeah,
that stereotype of, you either go to college or you go to construction. You go to construction if you're not smart enough for college. Like, we need to get that stuff out the window. That couldn't
totally,
be further from the truth.
totally.
Awesome. One other thing that you really talk about that I want to spend some time unpacking is shared situational awareness. Um, First of all, what the heck is this? And then, second of all, you talk about shared situational awareness being non negotiable in the military, but often kind of absent in construction. So, when did you recognize that gap? Um, and what's being done about it?
Yeah, so like going back to that origin story that I was bringing up in terms of when I entered into industry and was on job sites, and again it goes to that kind of like just I was lucky to be in that unique role where I was able to have insight into a site super or trade level all the way up to like what the lender was seeing and needing,
Mhm.
for each job. And what we were seeing or what I saw just personally was a few things. One is a fractured layering of systems,
Mhm.
so that there wasn't a single source of truth from like literally that entire chain of command. Second was, because of that, there was a lack of kind of data integrity and what people were seeing or knowing how things were getting updated for decisions.
Mhm.
And this goes like up and down, right? I'm not trying to or alluding to any specific person or trade or stakeholder. It's really just everybody combined. And then lastly, what I also experienced when we had like partners on projects, for example, and just now based on conversations, is a lot of times ownership is very hands off,
Mhm.
which I mean I just can't understand for the life of me. I mean, if you're going to be hands off, then I don't know how you expect something to run smoothly, right? You got to be involved.
Yeah.
So again, it's just in all directions. There needs to be a simplicity because we're talking
Mhm.
about end of the day. Uh, dozen different companies. We're talking about manual labor. We're talking about logistics. So all these
Mhm.
are very complex, and they all have a variety of things that can go wrong, which will then break out your critical path accordingly. So, uh, point being is that you need a single source of truth so that everybody could understand what's real,
Mhm.
as live as possible, right? So as updated as possible. And then second is you need involvement, from top down, down up, right? In terms of site teams to lenders, site teams, and everything in between. I mean, that's really how you're going to get uh, you know more efficiency and just better results overall.
Yeah, and I mean that brings up, the whole point of, ownership and accountability, which,
Mhm.
as we know, is so incredibly vital and important to making sure that these projects, not only are done on time, but they're also done the most effective way, the
Mhm.
safest way, cost effective as well. We love saving money here. Uh,
Mhm.
but kind of thinking about it from the other angle, you know what does it look like when the decision makers are too far removed? You have those owners that aren't involved. What does that look like? What implications is that going to have on the team, on the project? I know this is going to be bad. I'm already waiting for some right here.
I mean, if you like think about it, so you're allowing for site teams who don't necessarily have the full picture.
Mhm.
Um, you're allowing them to make critical decisions, which obviously have impact into an overall project. So those decisions may or may not align with ownership. And by the time ownership understand if in this case, in this example, if ownership is hands off, by the time ownership understands a decision that was or was not made, it's too late in terms of, okay, cost overrun and schedule overrun. Like you're just asking for issues.
Too late and millions of dollars later.
Yep, exactly. I mean, just like fundamentally, I really can't understand that headspace of being hands off.
Yeah.
I see it literally all the time. I mean, at least 50% of the time. And I really just I can't. I'd love for someone else to explain to me why that's a I don't know, logical way to run a project.
Hey, Adam, maybe we can do another episode where we invite some owners on here to answer that question for us because I'm wondering the same thing.
Yep.
But, it also begs the question of why would they be so hands off? What is their reasoning behind, distancing themselves from their projects and, in a sense, not really taking ownership of that project?
Right. Right.
So why? Why would they do that? I mean, there's a
Yeah, I don't
million
know.
reasons.
I mean, I think it's just like they want to stay in a lane and delegate. But I mean, I think that is a reason. I can't understand or explain it further because I don't agree with it or get it. But
Yeah.
I think that's like generally the headspace that I see in those circumstances.
Yeah. And to play devil's advocate, I think, some people, some owners might worry about increasing that visibility, might look like micromanagement,
Right.
something like that. But I mean, for all of you owners out there listening, if you get anything from this podcast, be involved with your teams, be involved with your projects, know what's going on. That
Yeah.
is, if anything, if you take anything from today, first of all, it's that Adam Stark's really great guest, really cool. Second of all, be involved.
Exactly. There you go. Yes. Thank you.
All right, podcast done. We're out. Goodbye. Um, that kind of brings me to my next question on, we're thinking about, not being involved in as much, not taking that accountability, ownership. What happens if you don't? What happens if you do? Um, but I think it's a lot about balance.
Yep.
So, what are some tips? What are some tricks that you can give to organizations to help kind of strike that right balance there?
Yeah. I think it's all about setting the standard up front and expectations up front. So you can, again, I know a lot of builders, for example, will embed this literally into contracts, right? So I mean, you could
Mhm.
go to a degree where it's like very formal, but or less formal. I mean, it's up to you.
Mhm.
You set the roles, set the expectations up front. Uh, I don't think micromanaging is an answer. I would avoid that. I would say do not micromanage.
It's
Though
exhausting
I'm
too.
yeah, yeah, and I mean that'll probably end up not working out for you well. But I'd imagine internally, right, you have some form of review mechanism. So why wouldn't you, implement that same form of mechanism for your external stakeholders that are running projects for you? So I mean, just set it all up front. Have some recurring standard cadence to it, and manage it accordingly. If you see an issue arise, whether it be your cadence is too frequent, too infrequent, if you're too involved, so you could always adjust as things occur,
Yeah.
and you likely will adjust because again, there's tons of moving pieces on any project, so you should be willing and able to adapt as your project moves along.
Yeah, I think a lot of that also probably comes from, building the trust and building that culture within your company, within your
Yeah.
organization. And as a leader, really feeling like, I can, pass this off to my team, I can delegate it. And I'm not worried that they are gonna, take it and run with it and make it even better than what I thought. Um, how do you even go about building that kind of community, that kind of culture within your business?
Yeah, I mean, that's not easy, right? Building culture
No.
is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Um, I think a good way to do it is you make sure that first of all, I mean, obviously, you have to make sure that everybody is actually aware of the culture that you're trying to create, right? So if you have like a mission statement, if you have like your uh, standard operating procedures, you got to have something laid out that,
Mhm.
again, it could be quarterly, it could be biannually. You have to have some form of like revisiting your mission and the way that you like to run your company,
Mhm.
so that people understand. I think the second way to do it, or a secondary good way to do this, is make sure people know the why
Yes.
all the time.
Oh, yeah.
To make sure, and that goes back to also like being involved, right? I mean,
Mhm.
if you're not coming from an owner perspective, if you're not involved in your project, no one's going to know why for anything, and then you're just asking for lack of performance, or not performance to a good an excelling degree.
Yeah.
So I think those are two ways to at least create some standardization to culture.
Definitely. And what I've seen, from my experience in talking to many, many different owners is, once you give your team, that level of visibility, that level of understanding the why behind a project, all it does is get them more involved, get them to understand where we're coming from. And what I've seen is it actually, improves their work. They get more
Yeah,
excited. They're into it. They want to see how more they can improve it. Um, so, I mean, that accountability, transparency, communication are just so important. And I feel like a lot of times with military, that's very ingrained in your processes. We know exactly what we're doing, we know why, we know our goal. And then sometimes that translation gets lost along the way to construction.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but just as my last question of the day, and this is a question I've been holding on to for months for you. So I'm finally excited to ask it. But if the construction industry adopted this level of visibility and accountability and communication that these veterans are so used to, how different would project outcomes look in 5 years?
Wow. I mean, I would like to think, especially given what those buzzwords, I'll call it, are really just embedded in the mission of my company today. So, I'm going to be a very cup is half full kind of response. There is, going back to the basics is kind of how we perceive. Okay, this is how we can improve efficiency in the
Mhm.
industry. Maybe eventually we'll get to the level of AI running everything. But
Mhm.
before we get there, again, I see industry as being you know driven by manual labor, people on job sites, multiple companies and entities that need to collaborate and work together. And in order to get to that end result of increased productivity or less budget and schedule overruns, well, we have to go back to the basics here. And how do we simplify everything and build culture around, creating productivity? Because that's, again, that's kind of where this big gap exists, or this issue exists, that we haven't seen kind of improvements over time. Um, so, again, I just go back to these basics like you just brought up and like we've been talking about. I think that really pushes the needle for industry, is if we could kind of, simplify and build that culture around accountability and transparency across all of the stakeholders.
I completely agree. Sometimes you have to take things back a few steps to really propel them forward.
Mhm.
Um, so, Adam, this has been a truly amazing conversation with you today. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything? Any shameless plugs?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any veterans listening, or any company who has veterans within the company listening, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn to recommend yourself or someone for the podcast.
Mhm.
Really, the criteria is that you served and that you work in industry, and that means the built environment at large. So there, that's it, and then you're already good to go for a guest. And yeah, you can find the show on all typical social platforms.
Yes. And for all of our listeners, our viewers, I will put all of these links down here in the description for you so you can find Adam's page, Jet.Build, and his podcast super easily. Would love, love, love to get you guys over on that podcast, give you your moment to shine and tell your story, just like Adam has today. So, Adam, once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Colin. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. And I'll see all of you guys next time on CO Pod.